I can screen 2. Okay, let me know if that's coming across.
It is. I can see it.
I don't know if are all the controls showing up too? Is that in the way?
It's fine for me. It's fine on my view.
Okay.
I have a strip of faces on my right side and the slides on my left. I do think you can change the settings for this. This is how I have it set up.
Okay, cool. I like this. All right. Well, thanks for having me. And thanks for that nice introduction. I wanted to start out saying this because I think it kind of frames this whole discussion that, communication is one of those things that everyone thinks they're automatically good at. It's kind of like reading and walking in and going to the bathroom. It's, it's kind of tough when you're a kid, but now this is what we do every day. So you just assume that you're good at it. But, having worked in an office for nearly 10 years, I can tell you that this is not true. And, I'm sure many of you having done a lot of group projects can echo the same sentiment. Good communication, right? It's a skill. It's hard to come by, and great communication is even more rare. And I think this is really important because your ability to communicate is so crucial to the trajectory of your career. And in many ways, it defines the quality of your work. How good of an engineer you are is how good of a communicator you are. And the other part of that is many of the ways that many of the problems that we face in our professional lives are rooted in communication, right? Projects going over budget, missing deadlines, even lawsuits. You think that stuff happens because of math errors and miscalculations, but really it almost always happens because someone didn't communicate clearly or didn't communicate well or, didn't communicate enough. Just a little bit about my background. I worked for a consulting firm for nearly 10 years, first in Austin, then here in San Antonio. And I worked on a ton of, really cool projects, including a few really big jobs, and just had a really exciting stint as a professional engineer. And communication was a skill that I focused on really hard. And during that time, in whatever spare hour after work or on the weekends that I had, I started making videos about engineering and posting them to YouTube to kind of share my passion and interest with this career under the name Practical Engineering, if you're not familiar with the channel. So some of these videos have been terrible, right? I have no formal training in video production. I made a video about HEC-RAS models on Mars, although one of my personal favorites was not the biggest hit. No offense to you hydraulic modelers out there. And then some of the videos have gone completely viral, right? With millions of views shared around the world. This was a video I made about how sinkholes form. And that's one of my favorite headlines from when that video came out. When I got 100,000 subscribers on the channel, which I felt like was an incredible feat, YouTube sent me a plaque, and it's hanging in my office right now. And then when the channel got 1 million subscribers, they sent me another plaque. And, as proof of how big a nerd I am, those are hanging right here in my office next to me. And now the channel has nearly 3 million. Actually, I think it has over 3 million subscribers now. And every month, somewhere between 5 and 10 million people watch my big dumb face talk about some aspect of civil engineering, which is, it's pretty crazy. And the reason I'm sharing those statistics is that I learned so much more about communicating about engineering through the production of these videos and interactions with the audience there than I ever did in higher education or on the job in a professional setting. And running this YouTube channel and all its related side projects is now my full-time gig. So communication is how I feed my family now. So I just thought it would be kind of fun to take some of those lessons that I've learned over the years and try and boil them down and share with you in the hopes that maybe some of it might be helpful to you. So in the spirit of YouTube video titles, this is my top 9 lessons learned as a YouTube engineer. Why not 10 lessons? Stay tuned to the end to find out. So number one, I call show the problem. Engineers love to talk about solutions, but we're not always very good at explaining the problem that the solution is intended to solve. But if you can do this and do it well, it's a really, really powerful tool in communication. And one of the reasons is that it kind of humanizes you. And so I can give you an example of that. I don't really like public speaking. This is not something that I consider myself very good at. I'd much rather be in front of a camera where I can try again if I make a mistake. But last year I got invited to the TEDx event there on campus, actually, and reluctantly agreed. Spent a lot of time working on my presentation and practicing. And, I was pretty proud of it. And I felt good about it. I showed up to the rehearsal and gave the presentation, and everything worked perfectly. And the next day, showed up on that red spot to give my talk, and about 5 minutes in, the microphone died. And so they pulled me off stage. I had to get a new microphone put on and go out and start over. And then I was so flustered and nervous that I ended up forgetting a part of my talk, and it just didn't go that well. And you could go online and you could go on the TED YouTube channel and watch this. They edited it together pretty well, but if you look closely, you can tell I'm not having a lot of fun down there. And the reason I tell this story is because commiseration is humanization. Just because you know my little story about TEDx, you are much more willing to forgive any mistake that I make in my presentation from now on. And so that's one of the things that kind of showing the problem can do. The other thing is that people love to solve problems, right? And so this is a way to basically get people engaged in the solution, and potentially even, if the situation is appropriate, to get some collaboration, which is a hard thing to do in professional communication. And then the third thing that showing the problem does is it makes the solution self-evident. And I can give you an example of that too. Last year, we made a video called Why Buildings Need Foundations. And of course, we could have just made a video that was called The Different Kinds of Foundation Systems and listed off, footings and rafts and basements and crawl spaces and piles and all that. But instead, we decided to structure the video by talking about the challenges that you face when you put a structure on the ground. We talked about bearing strength and differential movement and vertical loads and horizontal loads and rot and termites and freezing. And the thing, it's a subtle reframing, but what that does is once you start to understand all these problems, the solutions to those problems become self-evident. For example, once you understand the challenge of founding a building below the frost line, it starts to make sense why buildings in the north all have basements and the ones in the south don't. Or once you understand bearing strength, it makes sense why some structures need deep foundations like piles. And so if you can show people the problem, the trick is that you almost control the train of thought of your audience. And it's a really powerful thing, because if you can answer a question as soon as it pops into the head of your audience, that makes them feel smart and connected to what you're saying. And it's easier to do that if you're focusing on the problem first, basically. So lesson 2, I call use case studies. And this is very simple, but important. People love stories. Narrative structure is as old as human history, and a plot is a really, really powerful way to share information. And yet, what are our reference points for professional communication? Emails, phone calls, college lectures, government reports. And I put this question at the bottom: what was the last piece of media you couldn't put down or stop watching? Was it any one of those things? No, right? It was some kind of story. Now, you can't invent fictional narrative to get your idea across, but what you can do is use real stories of projects you've worked on or read about or about. And I consider this like a secret cheat code to audience engagement. Nearly every practical engineering video, if it isn't a story in and of itself, at least opens with a case study. And it's basically a way of answering the question, like, why should I care about this? Why should I care about the way that groundwater moves around structures? Oh, a construction worker fell into a sinkhole that when a caisson blew out, that's like immediately relevant to me all of a sudden. Why should I care about the problems that huge industrial pumps face? Oh, my city sits below groundwater, or sits below sea level, I mean, and we need these gigantic pump stations to deal with the drainage problems. And you could do this too. ASCE and pretty much any professional organization has websites that are full of conference proceedings and papers where engineers have shared the stories of their projects. And that's a really valuable resource. Not only is it just helpful to you to learn about those stories, but you can use those stories as a way to get people engaged and interested in the information you have to share. Lesson 3, I call draw picture, also very self-evident. Some of you might know this. I wrote a book that came out last year. It's called Engineering in Plain Sight. And it kind of looks like a kid's book, right? It's full of illustrations that are kind of childlike, but I didn't mean it to be a kid's book. And, the writing is a little bit above the heads of most kids, I'd say. But do you know why adult books aren't colorful and full of pictures like this? It's not because we don't like pictures. It's because illustration is hard work and it's expensive. Children's books are colorful because kids wouldn't read them otherwise. And yet adults, a lot of the things that we have to share can be said in words alone, but it absolutely doesn't mean they always should be. And, that's probably not a revelation to anyone. We all know the phrase, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And yet in communications training, we focus on what? Writing and speaking. And there's this critical third leg to that stool of visual communication. And so, this is me just basically trying to empower you to get in touch with your artistic side. Spend a little time in Photoshop or Illustrator or with a tech pen and paper, or even in Excel making, graphs and charts. Take a class and just invest in your ability to express ideas visually, because it can really take you a long way and it's really important. Alternatively, this is me empowering you to pay someone else to do this because it is a pretty difficult skill. And of course, it's hard for engineers to invest in skills like this. But, the basic lesson here is just that when the situation demands it, you've got to find a way to use visual communication. We use motion graphics on practical engineering videos. Pretty much every single video has this when we need to express something or when we need a way to convey information and that's better than words. The other thing we do, and this is probably less relevant to you all, but we build physical models of things because again, it's just a way to express information better than words can. So, for example, this is a little model pump station we built, and here's another model where we were showing the differences in cathodic protection for rust. And, again, just to restate the point is that you've got to, when the situation demands, you've got to invest in that process of visual communication because it's just really important. Lesson 4, I call packaging first. So, a lot of people think there's that one main hurdle of communication, which is getting people to pay attention to what you're saying or writing or whatever. But really, there are 2 hurdles to communication. The second one is getting people to pay attention. But the first one is just getting people to click on the video or open the report or show up to your presentation in the first place. And that is a huge hurdle. In my industry, obviously, we call this the attention economy. You're always competing for people's attention. I know you guys are undergrads, so you probably haven't been to a lot of conferences, but if you've ever been to one, and you look at these blocks and there's like a list of so many presentations that you can go to. And a lot of times it happens where you're looking at your program and you're reading through the list of talks you could go to, and just none of them sound interesting at all. And maybe they're good talks, maybe you would learn a lot, but if they can't even convince you to show up, then it doesn't matter at all. And so this is something we think about a lot for the YouTube channel. And I think it matters for other types of communication as well. Even, when you're writing an email, you have to choose what goes in that subject box. And that matters, because if it's not interesting or relevant to someone, they're not even going to click and open your email. So, as I mentioned, this is something we think about a lot. And it's to the point where we don't pick a topic for a video anymore. We pick a title and a thumbnail first. And that seems kind of subtle, but what it does is it forces you to kind of recontextualize a topic and figure out what's actually the most interesting part about it. And I have a few examples of that. So we did a video about geometric design of highways. And of course, we could have just called the video that, right? But instead, we thought about what is the most interesting part of this, like what's most relevant to people, and ended up giving the title, How Are Highway Speed Limits Set? And you can kind of see how that changes the clickability of the video. Same thing with this one. We did a video on horizontal directional drilling. And again, we could have just titled it at that, a summary of horizontal directional drilling. But we thought about what is the most interesting part of this? Where is the curiosity gap? And really, we decided it's how do you steer that drill below the surface of the earth? So that is what became kind of the jumping off point for the whole script of the video. So creating the packaging first before you really dive in and create the actual content of the thing, whatever you're doing, is basically a way to separate yourself from the audience. And that's important because there's usually a difference between what you care about and what your audience thinks they care about. And so you've got to bridge that gap somehow. And you have to do it before you even invite them in to present the material or, have them read whatever you wrote or anything like that. So, creating the packaging first forces you to identify what's most interesting, capitalize on that, and then create content that basically delivers on that promise. So it's just a different order of doing things, but it's extremely valuable. And I just pulled one more example of this. These are 3 videos about ground subsidence that I just pulled off YouTube. And, they all have relatively similar information inside, but you can see, these 2 on the left have a few thousand views, and clearly just didn't put that much thought into how to package what they were trying to communicate. Whereas Vox Media asked this question, why Jakarta sinking? The majority of the video is just talking about how land subsidence works, but they created the packaging to be compelling. And so, they were rewarded with millions of people watching the video. And it's hard work to do this, by the way. Not all the messages that we have to share with the world are that fascinating. So it takes time and effort to think about what's necessary and what's not, what's interesting, how to help an audience make a connection to information that might be dry and mundane otherwise. But, thinking about how you're going to package your communication first before you really create the communication is a tool to do that. Number 5, I call borrow. This is something I learned as a consultant. You never start from scratch. Whatever you're doing, whether it's a report, a design, a drawing, a talk, an email, you go back and you look at examples of where it's been done before. And, most good stuff is derivative in some way. People learn to play the guitar by playing their favorite guitar player songs. People learn to draw by drawing their favorite cartoon or comic book characters. If any of you are writers, you might have heard this term reading for craft. And the idea is that, the best works of writing or film or video or podcasts or audiobooks or anything, you kind of get swept up in them, right? You don't pay attention to the details of how they were put together. So this idea of reading for craft is kind of taking a step back and paying attention to structure. What information is shared at the beginning versus what's held back to the end. How do they signpost? How long before they cut to the next scene? All those little details that were conscious decisions for the creator, trying to make them conscious to you as well. It's a way basically to learn how people do things. Yeah. So, communication isn't a black box. It's out there for anyone to have a look. And so, scrutinize and learn from and borrow from the people who do this well, the people who you admire, basically. I'm not saying plagiarize. I'm just saying to pay attention to the methods and strategies and tricks that work well for others, and kind of metaphorically stand on the shoulders of the giants in your own personal life and the people you admire. Number 6, I call create a feedback loop. This is another thing that I learned the importance of as a consultant, is quality control. Some of you have been interns at in engineering organizations, so you probably know this term as well. You've probably turned in a memo or a report or a calculation or something, sent it to a senior engineer, and got back a sea of red. And the reason it's true for everyone, not just you, but even those senior engineers, quality control is important, because if you did the work, you're too close to it to see its flaws. And so basically the only way to get better is to get unbiased feedback. So you've got to find a way to get that, whatever it is. I'm very fortunate that on the YouTube channel is basically a platform meant for receiving feedback. So we get roughly 5,000 comments per month, and plus I get a tremendous amount of email. And some of it's good and some of it's bad, right? We get all kinds of different feedback on the channel, compliments and praise, mean things, topic suggestions, tips for making things better, and even experts in their fields who are, have thoughts to share. And I try to read all of it, because feedback is just so valuable in whatever form it comes, and it's hard to come by. It's hard to get people to give you this feedback. Companies pay big bucks for focus group and surveys and things like that. So whatever it is, whether it's leaning on coworkers, friends and family, posting stuff online to strangers, just find a way to open yourself up to feedback, because it really is how you get better, basically. 7, I call drop the act. My wife, there's a nice picture of me with a mustache. My wife is in education, and she was a kindergarten teacher when I first started working as an engineer. So, obviously I got invited to her school to give a presentation about civil engineering. And what do you do when you give a presentation about civil engineering? You talk about friction angle and cohesion and factors of safety. No, you try to make it relatable to the students. I was a dam engineer. I've been called worse, but that's what my employer called me. So I built this model that shows the different purposes of a dam and reservoir. Kind of went overboard a little bit, but the normal way these career days work is 1 or 2 grade levels come into your room and sit down and give this presentation for 10 minutes or so, answer some questions, and then a few more classes rotate in. So you end up giving the same spiel just over and over, maybe 5 or 6 times in a row. And, it seemed like the kids were really interested in what I had to say, but I noticed that I was getting a lot of questions from teachers and administrators. And so, the next few classes, I just started paying attention to those adults in the back. And I was just so surprised at how attentive they were. And, the number one small talk question you get as an adult, what do you do for a living? And, you do your best to answer that, but I never talked about civil engineering to any adult and had them look at me the way that these adults did when I was presenting to their students. And it slowly kind of dawned on me over the course of these 5 or 6 presentations that engineering doesn't have to be boring. It was boring when I talked about it, because I was, trying to make myself sound smart and dignified and avoid dumbing it down or accidentally patronizing someone. So, it was kind of a eureka moment for me when it comes to communication. And it's really what inspired the YouTube channel. And I've basically spent the last 10 years or so reminding myself that the average adult knows just as much about civil engineering as your average kindergartner does. And yet, when we communicate to the general public about technical things, we have this tendency to assume that they have the same context and background that we do, and they don't. We've all sat through a presentation or had a conversation with someone where they assumed that you knew something that you didn't. And is it fun? No. Is it interesting? No. When you're forced to listen to someone talk about something that you have no connection to, you just turn off your brain. You don't even pay attention. And so when we try to dignify our message by using jargon and technical terms, by being careful not to patronize with too much background information, we do it at the expense of really connecting with the audience and giving them an opportunity to understand and appreciate our message. So this is just me saying, drop the act, right? Simplify your message. Don't use jargon. And if you have to, explain what it means right then and there. Basically, don't be afraid to share your message like you would to kids. Half of all civil engineers just sit around thinking about rock and dirt all day, right? We have no good reason to pretend to be so dignified. So this is not how you keep the interest of a bunch of kindergartners for 15 minutes. It's how you reach an audience on their level. 8, I call show enthusiasm. And this is, it's very related to the previous one, but I think it's important to separate it. And this is kind of specifically for non-written communication, but, it kind of applies. In the same way that we use fancy words and jargon and technical speak as a way to project our confidence, we often use a kind of stoicism to project confidence too, right? We want to sound like that airplane pilot over the intercom. But the truth is that if you look bored, your audience will feel bored. And we think of charisma as this thing that you either have or you don't have, but that's not really true. You have a ton of room to show enthusiasm for your information. And it's not just in, how you act, but it's also in the actual words you use. Here's kind of a silly example. On the YouTube channel, we did this 2-part series about pumps. And, we knew that for a general audience, maybe that's a bit of a stretch in terms of making the topic engaging. So in the intro to the second video, there's one part of the script where I just say, I love pumps. And it was just being kind of silly, but it's true for me. And it might be true for you too, but I guess it's not something you'd normally say out loud, but people loved it. And we got tons of comments about that line. And I think it just came down to the fact that, yes, this is a topic that most people wouldn't get excited about, but me saying, I love pumps gave people permission to feel excited about the topic too. And, here's a trick that you're not going to like. Record yourself and watch it back. And I think you'll be surprised at how bored you can truly look and sound, even if you don't feel like you're coming across that way. You can go back and watch older videos on the channel and see the exact same thing, because it's taken me a lot of time to learn this lesson, basically. And I don't claim to be the best on-screen presenter, but this is something that I've, had to kind of learn the hard way. And so I'm just trying to share it with you. The main point is that, if your audience is going to look to you to decide how to think and feel about the information you're sharing. So if you want them to feel happy and excited and enthusiastic, you have to come across that way too. And it's harder than you think to do that. Last one, number 9, I call include a payoff. I said at the beginning, you'd have to wait and see why there's only 9 things on the list. And whether you realized it or not, that tiny little statement probably kept you paying attention just a little bit more to everything else I've said to this point. We're taught to signpost our communication, to say what we're going to say the thing, and then say what we said as a conclusion. That's boring. No one wants to hear all that repetition. The reason content formatted as a list is so popular is, it's hard to resist sticking around to hear that next thing. So, that's why you see it all the time online. There are a million different ways that you can take the information you want to share and put it in certain orders. And so this is just me saying, be thoughtful about that. Be thoughtful about what you share at the beginning versus the end. And make sure that your audience has a reason to stick around through the whole thing, whether it's a presentation or a report or whatever. signpost with some intrigue, and then reward your audience for sticking with you. Save some of that interesting stuff to the end. I call it the payoff. You call it whatever you want. We do this all the time on the YouTube channel. So here's your payoff, is that there actually are 10 things on my list. So number 10, I call take it personally. And, this is just kind of a summary of my philosophy. And then I'm happy to answer some questions, whatever people have. One of the tenets of the ASCE Code of Ethics is to educate the public on the role of civil engineering. We're actually obligated to help people understand what we do. And there are probably a lot of good reasons for this, but as an engineer on the internet, I have a little bit of experience in this field. And I don't have to tell you that a lot of what we do as civil engineers, if we don't do a good job, has consequences to public safety. And that's fine. There are a lot of professions that deal with public safety and security. Emergency managers, firefighters, law enforcement, medical professions. But if I'm a member of the general public, I can see a firefighter spraying water on a building, but I can't check the math of the civil engineer who designed the bridge that I drive over every day. That information, it's hidden from me in more ways than one, basically. So the fact that what we do is often not only complex and complicated, but also kind of out of the public eye, puts a great deal of responsibility on our shoulders. And I really think that's why ASCE obligates us to make sure that we're endeavoring to help the public understand what it is we do. Some of you might be familiar with the infrastructure report card. It's a communication tool that's put out by ASCE. I think they do it every 4 years, where they take a comprehensive look at all of the nation's infrastructure, identify needs for funding and action, and then give each category a grade of A through F, like it was taking a college course. And, it's kind of silly, but I think it is a good tool for communicating the state of our infrastructure. And it does work. Just about every news article that you'll read about infrastructure in America will reference this report. But I don't think it really gets people to care, right? It's kind of a shortcut to critical thinking. The report card it's a soundbite, but it doesn't necessarily encourage the average person to consider the infrastructure around them. And I guess the point I'm making is that this communication tool doesn't really satisfy that need to help people understand the built environment and how it works. The public doesn't need ASCE to tell them what to think about infrastructure. They need to understand how a water tower works, or where stormwater goes, or why road construction takes so long. They need help making a connection between themselves and their constructed environment, and the ability to form their own conclusions and opinions about its condition and needs. So they need to see and meet people like you who care about finding innovative ways to meet our basic needs. And I really believe this, and it's important to me. And, it's what drives me to get up and do what I do every day. And so I just really hope that some of these lessons that I've learned over my career will be helpful to you and encourage you to take opportunities to improve your communication skills. And not only that, but to be an advocate for civil engineering to the world, because I really think that the world needs that. So thank you so much for your time and for having me. And if anyone has questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you so much. Yeah, let's have some questions. We've got about 15 minutes. So if you have any questions or comments on what he said, or how he said it, or why he chose the visuals he chose, ask now.
I wanted to ask you, can you hear me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I know you talked a little bit about grabbing people's attentions and clicking on the video, but I wanted to ask sort of what kind of methods do you have for keeping people entertained and letting them watch the entire video instead of just getting bored in the middle and just kind of leaving the video?
Yeah, we call that retention. So there's a lot of things. I mean, some people are super hardcore about this on YouTube. The biggest part for me is in the writing. So all my videos are scripted, and that is where a vast majority of the effort, when you look at all the hours that go into a video, the research and writing side, what we call pre-production, is is a vast majority of that time. And it's, and that's really where we gain the retention, is by making sure the information we're sharing is interesting and engaging, by, creating oftentimes a demonstration of some kind that shows how it works really well. So yeah, just good writing is one part of it, but then the other part is the visuals. So creating demonstrations, working with motion graphic designers, scouring stock footage libraries to find the exact thing that we're trying to show. And in some cases, going out to the field and shooting something on location are all ways that we're, trying to keep the watchers in the audience engaged through the whole video.
All right, thank you.
So you said that you learned far more with your time on YouTube than you ever had in your I don't know, I think you said it during your time actually professionally practicing engineering.
Right.
Is there a specific example of that really stands out to you, like a particular topic or something that you really researched that stands out?
I don't have a specific example. The communication in a professional setting has a huge gamut of audiences. So a lot of times you are talking directly with other engineers in different organizations. For me, a lot of my clients, the point of contact for me was an engineer. And so that's easier. But then we would get put in situations where, okay, you're going to give a presentation at a public meeting to the stakeholders. And so those situations were much more challenging because you had to completely shift the way that you communicate. And I just saw lots of examples of it done poorly. And that's really where those opportunities where you were trying to convey information to a non-technical audience, those are really the opportunities where I saw there was room for growth in both, in our industry and at large, and personally for myself.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure.
I believe we have a chat question. I'm not sure if you saw it.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay.
Specific pieces of feedback. It's funny. I mean, there are probably hundreds that I could rattle off to you, but it's like, especially at the very beginning of YouTube where it was the Wild West for me. Even the littlest things like your music is too loud or the lighting is terrible, or even those tiny little things are like, you realize it's so easy to fix, but you realize like, if someone wouldn't have said anything, you would never have known, because you don't have the training or the expertise to pick that stuff out on your own. And even now, we get great comments about, oh, I wish you would have mentioned this example or this case study, because it illustrates the point you were trying to make perfectly. So it's just it evolves which feedback is most valuable to me over time, but I still am constantly getting good ideas and fixes and things for the channel that we continuously implement in the videos.
How many hours of research would you say goes into each video you produce?
It varies quite a bit. Obviously, I am a licensed engineer, so I have some detailed expertise in certain areas of the videos we make. But then, when I start to stray from my professional knowledge, the research times get longer and longer. I would say in general, each video probably has usually about 3 solid days of just reading and researching before and outlining. Basically, the outlining and the research kind of go hand in hand, but before we really start diving in and scripting the video, that's about how much goes into the research.
Thank you.
So, one of the big things about engineering is you have to understand the, problem, right? That's something you mentioned at the very beginning of your presentation. I guess with communication being almost like a primary part of your job, what are some hiccups that you had trying to understand that, especially on YouTube, which maybe, I don't know if at the time was a new platform or anything like that. I don't know how long, but what are some hiccups that you've had with that? Like maybe you either put out a video, you put out a presentation at work or something that just didn't work out too well, and you learned from that. Do you have any bad examples?
I mentioned the HECRAS video at the beginning. I mean, we've definitely had some videos that just, I don't want to call them flops, but they just did not resonate at all with the audience like we expected they would. And there's always lessons in there. Some of them are harder to, we put out a video not too long ago about telling the story about moving the space shuttle to a museum in Los Angeles. And, I just was sure that people were going to love the video, and it really did not. It was not nearly as popular as we hoped. And I'm still trying to figure that out. Like where do I not quite have my finger on the pulse of my audience? But I would say probably every single lesson that I mentioned in that presentation. Oh, I didn't quite catch that.
I think he just logged on and wasn't muted.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I think pretty much every one of those lessons that I listed in the presentation are lessons that we've learned through, well, not necessarily making mistakes, but learned the hard way through the production of these videos, basically.
That was an excellent presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
I paid more attention in that than I do in most of my classes. But yeah, thank you.
As I was hoping you would, because this is what he does. But I'm so glad to hear that. More questions?
When you're discussing a topic you're not really passionate about, how do you like compensate for that? Since sometimes we're gonna have to discuss things that we don't really care for.
I mean, honestly, the trick is to find a way to care about it. I mean, that's a huge goal of the research phase of any video, is me trying to find what are those little nuggets of interesting information, or what are the parts that people are really going to find relevant and that they're going to care about. Because the truth about communication is, if your audience doesn't care and you can't find a way to care either, then why communicate at all? There's no point in it. And so that really is the trick, is you've got to find a way to care yourself in order to make other people care. And the less time between when you care about it and when the audience does, the better you are at kind of remembering what it was like to not care about that thing and finding a way to care about it. Oh, I see another comment on the chat. How do we decide when to use motion graphics? Part of it's a budget, and motion graphics are expensive, so we have to use them judiciously. But really, I mean, it's just a feeling thing. We go through the script and basically look for opportunities where you're not going to be able to show something on camera very well, whether it's a static image or, stock footage or anything. So, anything that's math or equations related, a lot of times we'll use motion graphics with a diagram. Anything that's like a cross-section view or, looking on the inside of something, we use motion graphics for that. It's kind of tough to put a finger on, what the threshold is, but basically it's when other types of visual communication just aren't going to cut it.
We have another one here.
Oh yeah. How many people work on your team? So right now, let's see. I have a video editor who he basically handles all the post-production stuff. The motion graphics are contracted out to a company. I used to do those. I used to do all this myself, but slowly I've kind of cut out parts of it for other people to help me. And then I have a production assistant who helps build the demonstrations. He's a part-time guy who works in my studio.
What project did you work on back when you were working in Austin before your YouTube career?
I worked on mostly dams and heavy civil water related projects, so stream bank stabilizations and stuff like that. So most of my projects were in Texas. I did a lot of smaller jobs all around the Central Texas area, but I worked on a few really big projects too, including Lake Ralph Hall, which is the newest large water supply reservoir that's under construction right now in North Texas.
So we have, how would you compare the difficulties and nuances of challenges you face now to that when you were practicing engineer?
Oh man, how long have we got? No, I mean, some of it's the same, right? Deadlines are deadlines no matter what industry you're working in. It's definitely different working for yourself versus working for a larger organization. It's much harder for me to take time off because there's no one who can take up the slack. And then, yeah, there are some things that I really miss from working as an engineer, those technical aspects of really diving deep into the details of a project and trying to solve problems. That stuff, was a lot of fun for me as an engineer, and I don't get to do that stuff as much in it anymore. But there are some similarities too. Obviously, I mentioned deadlines. Another one is project management, which was the bulk of my job toward the end of my career as an engineer was project management. And now I just manage different kinds of projects, but it's allocation of resources and budgets and all that stuff that goes into project management is pretty much all I do every day too. Plus a lot of writing. There's a lot of writing in both jobs.
I think we've got time for one or two more. Anybody is interested?
What's your favorite video that you've made so far?
Oh, don't ask me that. Let me think about that. That's a tough question. One of the more recent ones was about spillway gates. And we built this demonstration with an acrylic flume and, dyed the water blue and put this mica powder in it that made it real swirly looking and cool. And the demo, it was kind of the culmination of all the lessons that I've learned about building little demos, just because it was so visually interesting. And it just really, I think, told the story of what we were trying to communicate well. So I was really proud of that one.
Yeah, your demos are always really good.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
I had a quick question. It's a little bit of a dumb question, but do you ever get hate comments that aren't even just constructive feedback? Like people are just being mean to you?
Oh yeah. Luckily, I think I get less of them than some people do. Definitely less than, than people outside my demographics. But the good thing is YouTube is pretty good now about filtering that stuff out. And so there's a place that I can go look at it if I want to, but I never do. So, and they catch some comments that aren't hateful too, but for the most part, the filters work pretty well and I don't have to deal with that stuff.
For more of a presentation setting, kind of like this, maybe less of the YouTube stuff, how would you do you want people to ask you questions at the end of it? Or how would you like if, I don't know, if I give a presentation at work or something and no one, everyone's kind of dead silent, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a bad thing. I think, well, it depends, I guess. if your presentation has a very singular goal, which is to, to provide information about something technical, maybe it's appropriate that everyone got the information they needed and they don't have any questions. In general, I would say it's a bad thing though, because I think if you're able to provide a thoughtful and engaging presentation, it is going to spark other questions in people's minds. And it's more fun and interactive that way anyway. So even if it's not good or bad, I just think it's more fun to answer questions at the end. So that would be my preference.
All right, this is our last one here from the chat. So we were about out of time, but as a Texas A&M alumni, did you have Dr. Lowry as a student?
I never had Dr. Lowry. I didn't take any of his
You
classes.
were a grad student, right?
I was a grad student, but
Yes.
I did. I was a member of Engineers Without Borders chapter there when I was there, and we did do I can't remember what it was about, but we did have a meeting in his office. So I got to meet him, and of course I knew his reputation really well too, because all of my friends had taken classes with him. So.
All right, well, we're about out of time, but thank you so much for talking to us. And, if anyone has a lingering question, feel free to stick around. You can email Grady, but as previously stated, he does get a lot of emails. Now, I have found you to be pretty responsive to email, but
Yeah, I pride myself on that.
I appreciate that.
No, I'm happy to answer any emails. I just put my email address in the chat. So yeah, feel
Great.
free.
And thanks for coming tonight. So I will see you guys in class this week.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we might have, are you guys in Pete's section for the next class? Yeah, okay. So they just came early. So
Nice.
but thank you so much. That was great. It was
Sure.
It was reminiscent of some of the stuff I learned in my grad program too,
Nice.
which was specific, science communication specifically. We do have a program here. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I know. Is it just a graduate program?
It is.
I
Yeah.
knew some schools had that.
Mhm. We are staying in the Zoom room, Pete. Yeah, it's just a grad program, and it's kind of been a one-woman show for a long time, but I think she's trying to branch out because she's getting older. Our advisor is great, very well renowned in her
Oh,
field.
cool.
Super smart.
Yeah, so someone asked me about my team, and that's one thing. So I just hired actually a writer and a producer. And one thing I was really trying to figure out is, who's the right person for this?
Yeah.
Because it kind of spans a lot of kind of things. And so we looked at a few schools that had those science communication programs, because it's kind of like exactly what
Yeah,
I do,
exactly what you
essentially.
need.
Yeah.
It's great. We have a great one. I can hook you up with her email if you're interested. She's always got students. They have an internship track. So
Oh, really?
yeah, they always have students they have a thesis track too, which I did not personally have any desire to pursue. I didn't,
Yeah.
but she's always got students looking for some experience.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that would be wonderful. Are there like professional organizations related to that? The one
Yeah.
big one I could find was the National Association of Science Writers.
That's the one that I'm in.
Okay.
There's a couple others too that are smaller. I think there's like there's certainly like a medical writing one. I forget if I think it's AMWA maybe. And there's
Society for Technical Communication. That's one I didn't find in my very brief research of the subject.
Yeah, the conference that I usually go to, and I haven't been there in a few years, is the AAAS conference. I don't know if you're familiar with
No,
that.
I'm not.
It's huge, and it's put on, they publish Science, the magazine.
Uh-huh.
And they have a whole, it's for science in general, the conference, but there's a lot of science writers there, and they have like a whole kind of like social events and meetings and things for
cool.
the science writers. And it's really neat.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, it's in DC this year. I forget when. It's usually like the second week in February, but I think it's later. I think it's in March this year.
Oh, nice. It's hard to travel these days. I have two little ones.
That would make it harder.
Yeah.
This is the first in-person one they've had, I think, since COVID, but I don't know if they might have a technical or, a Zoom option too. Not that most people still want to do that these days.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a few conferences via Zoom, and that was not very fun.
Yeah, I have to say, one thing that I learned particularly from Zoom school was the comment you made about recording yourself is just so powerful.
Yeah.
Recording my lectures and I'd have to edit them. And it made me cringe.
Yeah.
To hear myself. So
yeah, I still don't love to watch myself on camera, but
yeah,
that's one of the necessities of the job. So
it's always awkward. Always feel. I mean, I often don't read my own writing either after I publish it, because I know I'll just find something I want to contain.
Yeah.
I don't know. I look at it. I don't read it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've got 2 dogs. They were pretty much barking most of last class, but I just kept myself on mute so that nobody would know. For those of you joining us now. So this is Pete's group, the second group, they're coming on now, and there should be about 40 of them too. Roughly, give or take a couple.
Cool.
Yeah, so like I said, this is kind of the whole focus of our class. So I'm glad that we were able to fit you in. We talk a lot about communication.
And it is a civil engineering specific class, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Texas A&M, since you went for grad school, I'm not sure if you would know, they have part of their writing requirement is an upper level W course, writing intensive course in each particular major. So every major has to have one. This is the one for civil engineers, and chemical engineers have one, and biomedical science majors. Everybody has one. So they're all civil engineers. It's a 400 level class. So I'd say about 90% of them have had an internship already.
Oh, cool.
And a lot of them already have jobs lined up for when they graduate.
Nice.
Which is great. So we try to catch them on the way out and have them leave communicating a little bit better than they came in.
Nice.
Our goal. You guys are free to chat, before class starts. We used up all of our question time. Awesome. Which is great. It's hit or miss, I think when you interest them, which I didn't really want to interrupt them or anything, but yeah, usually if they don't have questions, either they fell asleep or they didn't get it. They had a lot for you. See, I think my dogs had gotten used to Zoom school where I would lock them out of a room. Now they aren't used to it. And they're very mad at me. All right, so we're getting pretty close to start time here. So for those of you, yes, I know we are still recording, Pete. I meant to stop it after the first. I guess I could still stop it now.